Hello and welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. This one into the winter solstice and Cardinal Quadrant 4, the last quarter of the Western tropical calendar. So this event is going to influence the next 13 weeks. As ever, I'm going to outline to you how I'm going to structure the video. But if you are new to my channel, it's lovely to have you with me, and your subscription would be extremely welcome. But if you have any comments, please do share them. I try very hard to interact with every single one. Now, this event occurs on the 21st or the 22nd of December, depending on where we may be in the world. And I'm going to share on the screen when the video begins of exactly where it occurs in all the major cities of the world. I'm then going to share a simple birth chart wheel which shows where each of the planets are, along with the sun's entrance into Capricorn and the relationships they have to one another. And there's two absolutely sensational links I need to tell you about. I'm then going to share with you the event chart using equal house based on Universal Central Time and on Greenwich, which gives us a collective view of how this is going to influence us all over the planet. And then please stay with me as I go through each of the aspects and the houses that are contained in that, which are different to the simple birth chart wheel. And finally, I'm going to give you your zodiac sign forecast from Aries through to Pisces. And you can watch these in terms of your sun or the ascendant. If they're different, of course, you can watch both. The choice is yours. Now, of course, year 2023 is nearly upon us. If you'd like to discover what this year will hold for you as an individual, please see the link beneath this video where you can take advantage of my sensational special offer. Your forecast for the year, plus your Western zodiac forecast, your Indian zodiac forecast, and also your Chinese forecast, all for 2023. But in my special package, I also share with you your life roadmap, your character analysis, which can help you to understand at a deeper level the patterns that have really made up your life and how you can exploit the opportunities and get more familiar with perhaps the more challenging patterns. So please stay with me for more. So the winter solstice occurs on the 21st or the 22nd of December, depending on where we're located. In terms of the major cities of the world, you can see on screen now where it occurs for them and exactly what time. The sun's return to the sign of Capricorn sees a welcoming committee, and that's first of all comes up with Venus in Capricorn. Venus governs the sign of Taurus, very much to do with everyday money, our self-worth, sensual pleasures, our appreciation of the good things in life. So in the sign of Capricorn, Venus is being tested in terms of the validity of our relationships, in terms of perhaps their potential longevity, or is somebody going to make a move to try to firm up their interest, or could it be that there could be discussions over resources in a relationship? Because of course Venus also governs relationships through its rulership of Libra. And this is an interesting thing, you know, because Saturn's the governing planet of Capricorn, but think of what the governing planet is of Aries, the first cardinal quadrant. It's Mars, which is about thrust, risk, instant gratification, getting things off the ground. And the second cardinal quadrant is governed by the moon, very much to do with how we receive emotional information, how we nurture, anything to do with shelter, security, our immediate environment. But guess what? Saturn's detrimented in the sign of Cancer, and Venus is detrimented in traditional astrology in the sign of Capricorn. And then bringing up the last of the quadrants is the autumnal equinox, which is governed by Venus. So Venus is the counterpoint to the thrust and go-getting energies of Mars, because it's very much to do with grace and trying to find the points of interest that we have, to celebrate the things we have in common, Mars is much more interested in individual action. And Venus is a nice complementary balance. So essentially, Saturn is a counterpoint to those more nurturing energies of the moon, and also Venus are more nurturing counterpoint energies to the more action orientated energies of Mars. So that gives you an idea of how the cardinal quadrants work. So I think over the next 13 weeks, a lot of us are going to be thinking about resources, because Capricorn is concerned with structures, whether it's to do with our properties, whether it's to do with the actual skeletal system we have, whether it's to do with our approach to business or resources, whether we're an entrepreneurial type or whether we prefer to work in an organisation where we may play a very valuable role, but there's some kind of bigger structure that we can fit into. And that kind of daddy energy, if you like, which sounds very outdated really in the days we live in now, it's a lot to do with Capricorn. It's a bit sterner, it sets boundaries, it can be restrictive, but it also can keep us safe. And Saturn can also bring us rewards. And that's something that I think is quite misunderstood in some ways. I think the focus is very much on Jupiter is the planet that brings rewards, and Saturn's the planet that takes things away and makes life difficult. But where we've really rolled up our sleeves and showed the patient application and systematic approach that really is what Capricorn is about, it can see us build up something quite substantive. But sometimes it takes time. But it needs the drama of Mars, it needs the emotional intelligence of the moon, and it needs the more relating energies of Venus to balance out those more harsh energies of Saturn. And perhaps what we've got, or has developed since Pluto moved into Capricorn in 2008, is there's too much emphasis on the Capricornian model. There's too much focus on the material world, too much focus on attainment and status, and the size of the car, the size of the house we have, how many holidays we have. And all these things are showcased through platforms like Facebook. And that's fine. It's okay to have security, which Saturn's very much about. But we need to make sure that these other energies, the other cardinal quadrants, are represented. So it's good to have some risks sometimes with Mars. Otherwise things would never renew or refresh or revitalise ongoing strands that are good. And it's also good to have some shelter sometimes, but of the more emotional type. However much we live in this big castle with a row of sports cars outside, if we've got no one to talk to about how we feel, what a very empty experience. And then of course we need someone to talk to. So if we don't have Venus, we're not relating to anyone. So Capricorn energy alone is not going to sustain us. And I think because Pluto is moving into Aquarius for the first time in 245 years, next year in March, very briefly, the 23rd of March, it will come back into Aquarius on the 21st of January 2024, and that's when we're going to see the real big shift away from this Capricorn period. I would stress, I don't think Pluto in Aquarius is going to be a panacea, and I will do a special video on that to explain why, but it could bring some reforms that could be very valuable. But some of the energies that Capricorn has is very good for us. And for example, if we're in a relationship which is just bumbling along and someone wants a greater commitment, that could be the energy that Venus brings on this event. But it's also linking with Uranus and the North Node in a sparkling trine. And because Venus can be about money and resources, and Taurus is very much about those everyday resources, and of course there's a natural receptiveness between Venus and these two placements, it's possible that we're being pushed to reinvent our approach to resources, perhaps using energy less unconsciously. But that's not to say that it's not good that a lot of people can't afford to heat their homes. That's outrageous. But if we can come up with more inventive ways to use our resources, more intelligent ways to use our resources, but loving the planet, so the two earth signs of Capricorn and Taurus, we love because we use our resources wisely, whether it's recycling, upcycling, buying clothes that are better quality that will last longer, or being more mindful of just cutting down on our reliance on the kind of consumer products that have become so commonplace, because they all have a lot of metals in them, we all know, that have to be extracted from the earth, and they're not going back in a lot of the time. So Venus is asking us to relate to the planet, I feel, in a more imaginative way, and it's linked to the node and also to Uranus. But Mercury in the sign of Capricorn is quite playful, really, because Capricornian people, as they get older, emerge from a rather shy persona often and have one of the best sense of humours possible, very bubbly, very earthy. And of course we do have Pluto, and both Mercury and Pluto, but especially Mercury, are forging a superb link to Neptune and also Juno, the asteroid of relating, which are in a conjunction in the sign of Pisces. So on the screen now I'm showing the simple birth chart wheel, which sees the gathering of energies in house 10, Capricorn, the gathering of energies that we have in the sign of Pisces, house 12. We have Jupiter and Chiron in the first house, the sign of initiation. And we have the node and Uranus in house 2, Mars in house 3, still in its retrograde to the 12th of January. And we also have the path of fortune in a wonderful link, actually, with Pluto. So there's a fantastic grand Earth trine between the midheaven on this event in the natal chart at 29 degrees in Taurus, with the path of fortune in Virgo and Pluto. So we can also see more clearly the benefits that we've enjoyed and just not taken them so much for granted. So maybe there's going to be a raising in consciousness about how we view resources that can come from this next 13-week period. But of course Jupiter, the planet of growth, the planet of optimism, the planet of daring, adventure, travel, of higher knowledge, of principles, of spirituality and its rulership of the sign of Pisces, that's just moved back into Aries, which is fiery. It's going to come out of its post-retrograde shadow on the 14th of Feb, and then it really will get going. But I think it's square with the Sun is asking us to think about benevolence, to think about how we can help someone who's less fortunate than us. Even if it's just thank you. If we don't have any money, but the post person brings our post to us through the driving rain, and we get the post off them, they ring the bell, you know, if we just say thanks very much, would you like a glass of water, I really appreciate what you do. That's the bonhomie that can come from Jupiter square the Sun. The danger with Jupiter square the Sun is that, of course, Jupiter in Aries is really about go-getting, initiation, and the Sun in Capricorn is much more about consolidation and slowing things down. So it's possible that somebody in some kind of position of authority in our lives may try to quell some kind of idea we've got to get going and be much more enterprising or even entrepreneurial, and just be prepared that their faint praise could prick your bubble. But this is where self-belief is so important. And with Capricorn, remember, it's accumulating energy. We don't get Capricorn energy the minute we start a business. We only get it after we've slogged away and shown that application, very Saturnian, and perspiration for a very long period of time. So if Jupiter comes along and tries to give us some hints about how we could do things in a new and fresh way, let's be open to it, but let's also appreciate the gains that that pack of energy in Capricorn can give us as well, even if Pluto, I feel, has pushed the alignment of this preoccupation with resources far too much out of kilter, and we need to re-steer society to be much more people orientated, and that's where Pluto in Aquarius can come in. Now on the screen now I'm showing the equal house chart for Universal Central Time. This is based on Greenwich in London, but I feel that this gives us a good feel for how we can all experience this event. And you can see the ascendant is in Virgo, very much about precision, being of service, making sure we are very much aware of how we structure our lives to try and make sure that we're as virtuous as possible. That's a tough call at this time of year. I think a lot of people are going to want to forget virtue somewhat, but remember we're talking about the next 13 weeks, and you can see that Jupiter, even though it's just in the sign of Aries, is still pretty close to Neptune. It's in a disassociate conjunction, bit wide, but we do have Neptune in the 7th house, so that need for the compassion of Neptune, the upside of Neptune, not so much the distorting and rather draining and enervating energy of Neptune, that still can be very good, and it's in that lovely conjunction with Juno. But you can see that Mercury in particular is in house 5, very bubbly, outgoing and fun. So with Venus, Mercury and Pluto all in house 5, I think for some people, especially over the immediate festive period, there could be a real need to have some moments of celebration. And you can also see that with Uranus and the North Node in house 9, those that can afford it are probably going to be jetting off to somewhere different, going somewhere that stimulates their senses. And if they can afford it, why not? Mars is right on that 10th house cusp. That's interesting. And you can also see that opposite Mars is Venus on the 4th house cusp, which is just at 7 degrees in Sagittarius. Sagittarius energy likes fluidity, it's a mutable sign, likes a bit of space. We can also see we've got Eros, very much to do with how we feel about relationships, pretty close to the moon, either side of that 4th house cusp. That's really interesting. So the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon is actually at 19 degrees Sagittarius. So we're going into this cardinal quadrant. It's very much Capricornian season. We have the impact of Pluto over all those years, but hey, we have the Moon and we have Eros and the Sun-Moon midpoint, which is the balance of the more receptive energies of the Moon and the more go-getting energies of the Sun in the freedom-loving Sagittarius, but paradoxically in the 4th house. So the Moon is actually in a perfect place to shine, but it still needs a degree of space. So that's really, really interesting, but it means the Moon and Mars are exactly opposite. So I think over the next 13 weeks there could be some turbulent moments between different viewpoints, people with different opinions. Mars continues to be in retrograde, but right up there on the 10th house, we're going to see a lot of a battle for ideological battles. But I think the people who feel things are going to want to push their agenda more than the people who just want to trade out facts and figures, which is all very well, but it's a dimension that misses out a lot of feeling. Like recently, over the last 6 months, someone I used to work with probably 30 years ago has just kept coming into my mind, but I don't think it's coming consciously from me. I think it's from the other person. And so the feeling dimension, the spiritual dimension, which is very watery, of course, we should never underestimate it. But the ironic thing is that on this particular event chart, Mars is in house 10, very much in keeping with Capricorn. And of course, Mars is a planet that's exalted in the sign of Capricorn. So we're going to see some big news, I feel, over the next 13 weeks to do with big tech. Obviously, Twitter's been causing a lot of chat and a lot of comment in recent times, but it's not just going to be around Twitter. I feel that there's going to be a lot of shifts and pulls. New platforms have come in recent times and newer ones will come in again. So the important thing to know from the fact that Mars and the Moon are so polarized is that those with the more intellectual arguments will probably try to crush those with the more emotional arguments. But because the Moon's in Sagittarius and the midpoint of this event is in Sagittarius, but in the 4th house, I think there's a good chance that the more feeling community can push back. Also, this midpoint is conjunct the fixed star Atria, and this is a combination of Jupiter and also Mercury. Now that's interesting because Jupiter governs the sign of Sagittarius. Now Mercury may be technically in detriment in the sign of Sagittarius, but Mercury and Jupiter is great for deals. So the home working revolution that came through under COVID is unlikely to abate. And we can also see the Sun is also in house 4, very much about relating and about our emotional needs. And perhaps because it is in a square with Jupiter in house 7, which is very Libra, so you can see these cardinal archetypes are really threaded into this event. It's going to be very interesting. There could be that, old sage in the family that thinks, oh no, you can't do it like that, You can't do it. It'd take a week to do that. And you're going to have the more enterprising people saying, well, look, if we feel things and we work with the more spiritual dimension, Jupiter and Neptune pretty close together, the two rulers of Pisces, and of course they came together in that exacting conjunction on the 12th of April in 22, well, there's still enough in touch to be pushing us to try to find that ways of relating that does break down just things being based on those polarized viewpoints. But there can be some play for sure with that Capricornian energy. And with Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn, in house 6, and that complements the fact that this ascendant is in Virgo, so house 6, very much a Virgo and energy, is saying to us that, yes, we need to still continue to be aware that whether we're into vaccination, not into vaccination, whether we are someone who has very strong views about how we look after ourselves, ultimately, whatever our approach probably does have an impact on somebody else, because Saturn in Aquarius is the sign of the collective. So we need to be aware of how our own attitudes do feed into other people's welfare and situation. And Saturn in turn forges a semi-sextile with Juno pretty well exactly, but also with Neptune, that's been ongoing for some while. And I think really the semi-sextile between Neptune and Saturn, which I haven't seen talked about on YouTube at all, and I've been very tied up with a lot of stuff going on at home, so I haven't had a chance to do a video. But if you think about it, Saturn being in Aquarius and Neptune being in Pisces, so they're both in dignity, they're actually pulling us to find this new way of structuring our lives, but feeling things, as well as feeling that we're connected to others. Saturn in Aquarius. Of course, Aquarius can be quite remote, and that's one of the challenges that Pluto is going to bring. So just to sum up, you can see in this event chart that also that midheaven that I was telling you about before, on the anaretic degree in Taurus, forging an amazing trine with the part of fortune in Virgo, and in turn an amazing trine with Pluto. So there can be change, big change that goes on, and it's going to be really interesting to see how the Capricornian energy, which resists change to some degree, will not without a lot of scrutiny or thinking or checking out the facts and figures and wondering how it will affect the balance sheet, certainly in a business context, how it's going to be affected by this Sagittarian vibe, but also the enterprise that's being pushed by Venus's link to Uranus and the North Node, and that grand Earth trine on this particular event. Now, please stay with me because I'm going to go through each of those 12 zodiac signs. Terms and conditions apply, only playing. From Aries through to Pisces for the Sun or the Ascendant, starting with Aries. So Aries, the big takeout for you, I feel, is if we think about your ruler Mars and where it's located and its angle to the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon, it forges a trine. Now that midpoint is essentially the epicenter of this event, and Sagittarius energy reflects your fire energy. It's very much about optimism and opening things up. Now Mars may be in retrograde, which is not so good, and it may be in that opposition to the Moon, which means that you're going to have to watch your frustration if things don't shape up quite as you would like. But you do have Jupiter back in your sign through to May the 16th, 2023. So there's lots of elements there which point towards perhaps trying new and fresh approaches and getting on the front foot. Now that doesn't mean to say that some of the old things that you used to do need to go completely out. It may mean that they need to be adapted, and that's where Venus's great link to Uranus and the node can also work well for you. But the fact that Jupiter in your sign is clashing with the Sun, if we think of the more downside of the square, just suggests that whatever you try, just be prepared that not everything necessarily will work out, and be philosophical about it. Nothing would ever happen anywhere without your energy. Your energy is the first sign of the zodiac. It's about initiation. It's about risk. It is about freshness. And it's about a sense of excitement and passion. Passion's so important. Don't let those Capricornian energies pulverize your passion. So whether it is about your career, whether it is about money, whether it is about your relationships, whether it is about your family life, whether it is about where you live, just know that the whole of our evolution as personkind has been driven with the help of your ruler Mars. So the fact that Mars is in that retrograde, is in that tender angle with the Moon, don't rush things too much. Don't be too quick to go for new opportunities without thinking them through. So use the systematic energy of Capricorn. Weigh things up with the help of experienced people who can guide some of your newer flows, and you can adapt and mould the best of what you're working with at the moment, but bring in some fresh approaches too, and that can really set you fair for these next 13 weeks. Now Taurus, for you the event occurs in house 9, very much about adventure, and really since 2008 Pluto has been asking you to do something that goes a bit counter to your core nature. You like a degree of continuity. It makes you feel safe. Now you may have resisted Pluto depending on where your Sun or other personal planets are, but you probably haven't resisted Uranus if you're born in the first half of the sign of Taurus. So change has become inevitable by the fact that Pluto is nearly at the end of your 9th solar house, and because Uranus is halfway through your first solar house, you will have been quite the magician to have escaped that energy. You would have had to have your Sun right at the end of Taurus, really, to have not quite felt the blast of the need to shake things up. Out with the old and in with the new. But of course, it's not necessary to follow that to the nth degree. What's important is to be open to the things we feel comfortable with. So if there's part of you that does feel quite rooted somewhere, has familiar patterns that do feed a sense of contentment, why give them up? Just because an astrologer says this is a time of great excitement for Uranus, what you can do is stay in exactly the same physical place, but change your personal reality hugely through the knowledge you gain, through the way you view things, and those can be refreshed in fantastic ways by your ruler Venus being so beautifully aligned to the North Node in your sign and also Uranus. So a great opportunity even to go somewhere completely different on a vacation over the next 3 months, because if you do, even if you're someone who has had a particular liking for a certain locality, which I can really relate to, it's very comforting, going somewhere completely different can really feed your senses, even if you come back with the idea that actually, do you know that other places where I most prefer? You will get the benefits that a change is as good as a rest. So that's really what's being offered here. But of course, the midpoint is in your 8th house. The 8th house is something that's much, much deeper in terms of the psychological potential. And of course, Mars, the planet of thrust, the planet of desire, is in your 2nd house. And it could, in its opposition with the moon, and remember the moon likes your sign, it's exalted in Taurus, but what we've got here is the 2nd house and 8th house axis, but in reverse, if you like, because Venus, the moon, which is exalted in your sign, is in house 8, deep and passionate, bit nervous, can be a bit secretive, comes up against Mars, and in the 2nd house, which could bring out that more pugnacious side of your nature. Perhaps that pugnacious side of your nature will come out because you don't want to change and you will resist someone kind of prodding you to change in quite a sort of rah way. Sorry about my reactory take there, but you get my drift. There may be something that someone could be a bit forceful about to change, and you might resist it. But then again, it could be you who gets impatient with the status quo. You might surprise yourself. I think some kind of change, spiritual, emotional, psychological, financial, is almost certain to occur. And this is going to accumulate with the Scorpio full moon, which occurs when the sun's in your sign in 2023. And you're actually going to see a lot of benefits come through then from all the challenges that have been manifested this year by the total lunar eclipse in your sign of the 8th of November. So I would say just be open to things altering, and it doesn't have to be everything, but if you can just go with that and flex a little bit, being a fixed sign, as I am as well, that continuity, those routines, those familiar ways of going about things are so lovely, but they can become a bit stupefying. They can throttle us. So I feel that you need a little bit of excitement, and there ain't much more exciting than Venus being trine Uranus. So if you are single, there could be a flash of attraction that shows up over the next 3 months, which really could delight you. Will it be long lasting? Perhaps, perhaps not, because of course Uranus can be quite an unsettled influence, but it can see things happen very quickly, and that's where you need to be on the front foot to take advantage. Now Gemini, for you, obviously having Mars still in your sign in retrograde, may have felt, certainly across October and November, start of December, that things just weren't going as you wanted, at the speed you wanted, and Uranus does continue in your 12th house, as it's going to do for some time. So the fact that it is forging a link with Venus, the ruler of Taurus, in your 8th house, suggests that some deeper innate quality you have, past experience, information that you've gained, can actually come out in a very productive way to help your financial situation in the next 3 months. Perhaps you're going to reimagine something that you're already in. So it could be taking on a job that can use some of the core skills that you developed, but in a fresh environment. Perhaps it will be to do with people, Venus, or it could be to do with your instincts, the 2nd house energy of Venus, your sensual appreciation. But you do have Saturn in the part of your horoscope to do with expansion, and of course Saturn can be more of a retracting influence, but it is no longer being squared in that very attritional way by Uranus. So I think the next 3 months you can find that your energy is picking up, your physical vitality, but of course with the moon in the opposite sign to Mars in your sign, it's clear that if you are quite impatient, then that won't necessarily be to your advantage. And I think the key to remember is the midpoint. The midpoint is in an opposition to Mars too, but it means that Mars is on your 7th house. So I would take that you can use Mars to be a bit feistier in terms of setting your boundaries in your relationships, but all that 8th house energy in Capricorn is a lot to do with thinking about how you can get your finances to work more productively. It is thinking more about the things that can evolve in your situation, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, physically, materially. So evolution can be very much part of what's going on, but I think Mars is a big part of the story. You can use it to have a sense of urgency, but don't push too quickly without contemplating in your normal, very quick-witted way what the potential outcomes could be. So I think the midpoint is quite a clue for you. So Cancer, relationships. There's a TV program in the UK, isn't there, called Location. Relationships is a bit too long, really, to get the rhythm. And that program with Phil and Kirsty is one I really enjoy. But relationships are really at the core of the next 13 weeks, simply because the sun moves into the point of your situation to do with how you contact and interact with people, sometimes compete, and sometimes in a combative way, to be honest. The sun into the 7th house can be about setting our boundaries. In traditional astrology, the 7th house very much about our open or known competitors or enemies. But we also have Venus there, and Venus is quite a delicious influence in the 7th house because it brings a soothing, harmonising vibe. Mercury encourages us to sharpen up our listening skills. Pluto has been bringing a real transformational vibe to all sorts of relationships for you since 2008, and there's probably been some big changes for many Cancerian people during that period. However, Mars does continue in your 12th house, and therefore the moon in your 6th house and also the midpoint on this event are very much concerned with the practical reality, but Mars is in a very psychological zone. So if there is something around your relationships, for example, if you have a cohabiting tie with someone, or even you share the same office space, and one of you tends to be pretty good about tuning in and, a bit of give and take, and the other one is totally hopeless at it, that type of stuff really could be quite testing over this next 3 months. But that posse of influences in the sign of Capricorn gives you a lot of astral tools in order to manage the process in a very effective way. And the clue is Uranus. Because Uranus and the North Node are so close together, and for you are in a very idealistic part of your situation, as long as you approach things with a real sense of fairness and what's generally reasonable, and you're thinking about your future plans in a very fresh and open-minded way, some kind of evolution can happen around relationships which is much more uplifting. But Mars could just still be a bit of an aggravant for you until it does move into your sign at the end of March, and that is a time, the 25th, that you're really going to be looking forward to, because I feel Mars in the 12th house, particularly in this retrograde, isn't easy, and of course the midpoint is opposite too. So I feel that hidden frustrations, angers, stuff that's been bubbling behind the scenes for a very long time could affect your physical well-being if you don't embrace them and bring them out into the light. And that's the clue really for you as a sign, because you have a general disinclination for conflict. So you scuttle left, you scuttle right, you scuttle under the sand to avoid the praying toes of holidaymakers. But the key is that when you do dust yourself down and go for it, you can be really tenacious and give a mighty bite. But that is a very reactive response. It's a very defensive response. So really what this next 13 weeks period is asking you to do as a whole is to find the ways in which you can relate and negotiate, so it's not such an extreme between feeling resentful, frustrated, and perhaps a bit low, to feeling very angry and things sort of bubbling over in a way which is not so good. So I feel you're being asked to step forwards and meet the challenges of life, people, situations in that midpoint, that pivot point between your sign, the first house, and those energies in the seventh house, to reach that midpoint and set your stall out. And that means, you know, saying how you feel, being open to what other people say to you, not being too defensive, not taking things so personally, because Mars, if it's not dealt with, could get into this next 13 weeks period in a more challenging way. Which brings us to Leo. So Leo, for you, having all this energy in Capricorn is very much about sacrifice, potentially. It can be about work and order and service, your actual physical role, the processes that you actually apply yourself to. But sixth house energy for a sign ruled by the sun is about as dull as ditch water. But I think Pluto's been really asking you over this period since 2008 to really apply yourself as best you can. So it's been a 14-year period where you've probably changed your job, you've probably put your needs to one side at times to support others, and that's really laudable. The key, however, is that with Uranus and the North Node in your 10th house, if all that sacrifice has led you to feel that you're not really fulfilling your true talent, you have an opportunity over the next 3 months to use the structures and the discipline that you've developed in those 14 years, but in a fresh, more vibrant and imaginative way. Go for it. Mars can help you. Mars in the 11th house suggests that perhaps there's going to be a changing of the so-called guard around some friends, particularly in the opposition with the moon point and also the midpoint between the sun and the moon. So that 5th, 11th house energy suggests that managing your time for your benefit is going to be part of the theme. So the 6th house can be a lot to do, especially as this event has got a Virgo ascendant, can be a lot to do with how we work to collaborate and cooperate to support others. But I think you've probably had quite enough of that over that 14-year period, and now any changes you make need to be in the way you reorder your situation, so you care for your physical vitality. You're getting a better balance. But if you do want to shine at work, all that diligence that's being shown with Pluto's help can now start to radiate out, and some big opportunities can come, big connections. The way people see you is often with admiration. You know, have a radiance of spirit, which is absolutely fantastic. If we think about this event from a technical viewpoint, it also sees the cluster of energy in Capricorn, not entirely because the sun's in the 4th house, but it does see Venus, Mercury and Pluto in the 5th house, very much in keeping with your sign. So if you're hosting Christmas, you're probably going to do it better than ever. But the key here, I feel, is to balance your dedication and your self-discipline with how you find an outlet that gives you a sense of excitement, because you are a fire sign, because you're governed by the sun. So you need to showcase your talents. This chart would be brilliant if you were into catering and we weren't having a sort of major global recession, because your ability to be a people pleaser in the hospitality sector, for example, but also have those front of house skills that absolutely are magnificent, you really could do wonderfully well with this chart. Okay, so the catering and hospitality sector is contracting. How can you use your skills in a way to help others, but also make your life easier? So I think you're going to be looking at efficiencies in this next 3 months, but efficiencies that can embrace your flair, but also around your love life. If you are in a situation where you're the one doing all the giving and the other person's the one doing all the getting, Mars, in its opposition with the moon and the midpoint, is going to push you to confront the issue and sort it out once and for all. Which brings us to Virgo. So Virgo, for you, the cluster in the sign of Capricorn is house 5. This is where you really start to get into the festive spirit. It happens every year when the sun moves through the winter solstice. And this year, because you've had your ruler Mercury enter the sign of Capricorn before the sun, I think you've actually felt a bit more jolly a bit sooner than you ordinarily might do. It's not to say you're not jolly, it's just that you're probably preoccupied with, the usual things that you're very good at, the systems, the patterns, the management, the detail. But all this clustering of energy in house 5 is really saying, look, give yourself permission to have some fun. Why not? Of course, you've got the path of fortune and the ascendant on this event in your sign, so you can also take a lead. What about the square with Jupiter? Well, it's possible that around a romantic situation there could be somebody who does take your fancy, and with Uranus and the North Node also linking to Venus, this could be a situation that requires you to take a leap of faith. And if you're someone who has a tendency to be rather more cautious, which totally understandable, just remember nothing ever really becomes dynamic unless we do take that step slightly into the unknown. So someone invites you out for a drink, even if it doesn't feel promising, it will give you some experience and perhaps some future life skills with the next invitation out, and it can all evolve into something exciting. So excitement is possible around your love life. Jupiter, of course, is in the 8th house of resources, longer term resources. I think what the square with the Sun is saying to you is don't be too risk-taking with your resources. This is where I wouldn't be too much into the potentials of chance unless you can really afford what you may be risking. But generally speaking, there could also be someone who shows an interest in you, even if you're in a relationship, to be honest, and it could happen very, very suddenly. And it may make you more conscious of whether you feel controlled or whether there's too much jealousy or possessiveness that's around your relationship. Because remember, Jupiter is the planet of freedom, and also the moon and the midpoint are in the part of your situation which is to do with how you feel about things. So if you feel quite closed in, I think this event could see you start to think about your connections with others and how you can bring them to life more, perhaps through shared interests or hobbies. Go into some kind of mutual group. Often Virgos are makers and crafters. Whether it's socially or romantically, that can bring more interest and spontaneity to your situation. So look to enjoy yourself. Step outside your comfort zone a little bit. Be a bit careful with longer term resources. If someone comes up with some kind of proposition which is a bit risky, but generally speaking, a time to really give yourself the platform to show off and have the time to shine. So Libra, we've got the gathering in house 4 again, but this time it includes your ruler Venus, and it also coincides, I feel, with a sense that after all the struggles, you're really, really aware of how to set your boundaries. And the interesting thing, therefore, is with Jupiter in house 7, very much to do with relating, if someone does try to take you for granted, just assume you'll go along with what they want, where you have felt overwhelmed really by other people's needs and the giving side of your nature has felt very challenged, I think Jupiter really helps you, even though it's in a square, because it's going to push you to perhaps find the right choice of words to set your boundaries in a way which is good. Also Mars in the part of your horoscope to do with travel, being more adventurous, but also more outspoken in the opposition with the moon and the midpoint, can give you the platform to use your quick wits, your airiness, your logic, to promote what you need to say. So I feel that this is an event that can work much better for you this year than it has for many years past. And of course, your ruler Venus is also involved in a sensational link with Uranus and the North Node. So when it comes to transforming a property matter or to do with using your resources, perhaps family resources, in a very effective way, I think you're going to be coming up with some smart approaches over the next 3 months, despite the challenges we all face. Scorpio. So Scorpio, for you, the arrival of the Sun in the sign of Capricorn sees it align eventually with Pluto. This is going to occur as the Sun makes its way into Aquarius, so in about 4 weeks after this event. And that in itself can be incredibly powerful, especially in terms of articulating things that are really important to you, because I think Saturn in your 4th house squaring with Uranus over the last couple of years may have just sort of made it more difficult to say how you feel, or at other times you've blurted out how you feel. So it's been a little bit of a seesaw between feeling very conflicted and at times very outspoken. I think finding your voice will become much easier. Also because there is your ruler Mars on your 8th house. The things you're passionate about, and obviously being a Scorpio, whether it's your interest, your partnership, your business, your politics, whatever you're passionate about, you can really embrace that passion with Mars's help. It's just saying be conscious of how your longer term view can be affected by your short-term responses, because the moon in opposition with your traditional ruler can be a bit reactive, can be see our moods very up and down. So what you can do with the 3rd house energy here, which is very Gemini-like, is to use logic and process things, but have lots of conversations, and that can be a great way to guide your moves over the next 3 months in a very productive way. But don't forget, you still have Uranus and the North Node in your 7th house, but unlike Saturn conflict in them, Venus is blessing them, so there could be some very unexpected but exciting conversations coming your way in the next quarter. Which brings us to Sagittarius. Now, because the midpoint is actually in your sign, because the moon is in your sign, because Mars is on your 7th house cusp, all good stuff in a way, because although moon opposite Mars can be difficult and can see us feel quite sensitive, and then Mars can be the outlet for that sensitivity in a very direct way, I feel that if there have been struggles, particularly around managing your resources, and I don't just mean with this recent cost of living crisis that we're all collectively experiencing, I think money's felt quite short for you ever since Saturn left your sign, and you know, now it's going to move into your sector of home and emotion and family on the 7th of March. The practice that Saturn's given you to talk things through and evaluate things is really going to come back to you in terms of how you do actually marshal your physical resources, because Venus loves the 2nd house, and I think it's possible there has been some slice of good news for you, or it's just how you feel about yourself. But Venus's link in your 2nd house to Uranus in the 6th house suggests a job opportunity or thinking about your work in a fresh way can still unlock something of quality for you. If you don't see it straight away, I feel by around about the 20th of January, you are going to see a transformation around your sense of self, your sense of security, and your financial situation, providing you're open to changing some elements of an old way of being. And it doesn't mean to say you have to get rid of everything, but an openness to fresh approaches, which you're often very much attuned to, can really pay dividends. The fact that your ruler, Jupiter, is in the 5th house, that's very much to do with manifesting your talent, your flair, your flame. And 5th, 2nd house can make you very generous. It should say that you should be a little careful about setting your boundaries in terms of the Christmas budget. If you can't afford things, say no. But I think equally, Jupiter squaring up with the Sun could bring money into your situation if you retain your self-belief. And your self-belief and optimism is one of your great assets, and that can really be to the fore over the next 3 months. So Capricorn, I feel Sagittarius season actually wasn't that easy for you. For sure, since, you know, the charm mob turned up in your sign, Venus and Mercury. Venus, hi, I'm so sensual, here in earthy Capricorn. And Mercury, hey, let's do the deal. I've got it all covered. Why did I sound like Bill Nighy there? Or should I say, why did Bill Nighy sound like me? But I feel that preceding their arrival in Capricorn, I think you were really a bit out of sorts. So the sun arriving in your sign instantly gives you vitality, no question about that, and very complementary to those other energies. As I mentioned before, it forges a semi-sextile with Pluto in itself is very transformational. But the problem for you is that the midpoint and the moon are still locked in the 12th house. So if there is any or there are any issues which are to do with very deep undertones, sensitivities, vulnerabilities, anxieties that are not quite gathered up and with you. So if you're not quite in the present, you're still processing some very tender themes, that's likely to be a case for a little bit longer. Perhaps the inference here is that for us all, I feel the transition of Pluto into Aquarius is necessary in a way, because I feel the Capricorn project with Pluto, remember Pluto is about power, it's not the same as your sun. Pluto can be mean, so there's been too much power of the wrong kind. So your intentions are often very sincere. You're the one that is the wise owl, the person who might say, well, I'm not quite sure about that, let's show a little bit of caution. That's very important, incredibly valuable. The problem with Pluto is that because it is about power and domination, the underworld, some of that power in the wrong people's hands has got out of control. So since 2008 we've had too much thrust down, and so the sun symbolically moving into your sign as an individual is asking you to embrace what makes you different. Not necessarily easy for a Capricorn, because staying with what's familiar, safe and structured can be comforting, but remember you are a business sign, so a lot of very fine business people are Capricorns or have Capricorn planets or an ascendant. But I think that midpoint is a clue, along with the moon. Don't ignore those tender strands. Keep working on them, but then see that there is a transformation going on. But I think that Venus and Mercury in that conjunction, but certainly Venus's angle to Uranus, is really enterprising, but it's also really great potentially for your love life. Perhaps that energy in the 12th house, that Sagittarius energy, means there's an admirer around you who's not showed their hand. Someone, it could be linked to the past, or you could be feeling very sentimental for someone who's no longer in your world. And there's part of you that wants to take the chance to reach out, and Uranus is urging you to do so. Of course, Jupiter's in your 4th house. If you do want to transform where you're living in some kind of way, you can set the project in motion from this point, and some kind of fruition could show itself by the time that Jupiter moves into Taurus on the 16th of May. Now, Aquarius. This event occurs in your 12th house. But it's a 12th house light in a way, I feel, because of the midpoint and the moon being in the 11th house, very much in keeping with your sign. Also Saturn and Uranus, your two rulers, are no longer having a quarrel. They've decided to sit down at the end of the astral bench and look at each other. I'm saying as I am. I want change, Governor, I want change. So they've decided they're neither speaking or they've had a battle. We can see, you know, we've got industrial disputes going on in Britain, particularly where the Capricornian energy of domination is being really challenged. And Saturn in Aquarius is domiciled, so it's talking about let's work collectively for something that's better for everyone, but it needs to be fair, Uranus in Taurus, in terms of the money. And of course, a lot of public servants have had no pay rise for 12 years, and therefore their real quality of life has been eroded by about 15 or 20%. So they're really angry, and it's reached a boiling point. But it's actually probably been manifested by Saturn and Uranus. But for you personally, the fact that they're no longer in such a tense standoff is good. But Venus being in the 12th house linking with Uranus, don't be surprised if someone from your past gets in touch with you. And it could be someone you had a real sweet spot for. Maybe it will be a family member that you're estranged with. Some kind of connection is possible. But with Jupiter in your 3rd house, I feel that everything you've learned with Pluto's passage through through Capricorn, since 2008, means that you're now ready to articulate your defence, and you can do it very passionately and very confidently. For sure, Mars, the Moon in opposition, 11th 5. Perhaps you're going to find out about the loyalty of certain people in your world, and perhaps you are going to have to sort of be a bit more forceful to assert what you feel is fair. But equally, the opposition between the position of the Moon and Mars, the midpoint and Mars, can ask you to be more mindful of your time management. I think certainly over the festive season, Capricorn people, particularly if you've got more than one planet beyond the Sun or the ascendant in Capricorn, do have a great need to hunker down. You know, I have a lot of Aquarius, and I find every single year it gets to the winter solstice and I do go into hibernation mode to the time of my birthday. Just so you know, on the 21st of January, if you want to send me a digital note of celebration. So yeah, I think that there could be some sensitivities to work through, maybe around certain friendships. Certainly loyalty is always a big thing for Aquarius folk, but generally compared to the winter solstice that's occurred for many, many years, I think it's been a real grind. I think this one offers a lot more hope. And of course, Mars in your 5th house. Hey, you know, Aquarius has a reputation. Do you remember the Cadbury cream adverts? You know, they were very sort of, hi, I'm an Aquarius. Well, Mars in retrograde obviously has challenges, but in the 5th house, you know, feel good about yourself. And there could be someone who's going to emerge from the ether and show a huge amount of devotion to you. Which brings us to Pisces. So Pisces, having your ruler Jupiter having made its way just this week into your 2nd solar house, could see your finances revive over the next 3 months or so. Wunderbar. Also, Jupiter's link with the position of the Sun. I think you have a huge capacity for compassion. You also have that other capacity to go to the polar opposite, to be ice cold to people you don't appreciate. But I feel that this square with the Sun is actually very warming, and you will do your best to look out for those friends or associates that you're very fond of in any way you can. But having that Venus position in that link to Uranus and the North Node, a connection you have that's totally unplanned, unexpected, could be someone introduces you to a mutual friend. If you are single, that could really be a dazzle, razzle moment, and one to really savour. Mars in your 4th house, however, in opposition to the Moon and the midpoint, it really wouldn't be a surprise if some Pisces people are thinking about their longer term future, which is Capricorn for you, the 11th house, and are really planning to make a change. You know, if you're in accommodation that's not as you want, even though accommodation generally the world over is very hard to find at good value, I think if you can either improve where you're living decoratively, imaginatively, or it is actually moving altogether, if you're really not happy, I think the chances are you will move. And try to get nearer to where you feel a sense of stimulation, you know, whether it's near to siblings, near to some energy which switches on your mind because of the 3rd house of Uranus. That gives you a need for that spark, but Mars is going to be the one that drives it. But obviously moving can be very unsettling, and it's not an easy process. You know, I've done it twice in the last couple of years, renovated 2 houses whilst trying to do this, and it is not easy to old houses. So if you do decide to make a change, it could be a bit bumpy, but it's taking you towards where your long-term future really needs to be, and that's what the collective in Capricorn is asking you to do. But obviously Pluto entering your 12th house in March, along with Saturn moving into your own sign, could point towards some huge changes coming for you. Wanting to get in touch with what's really essential, stripping your life down to where it's most psychologically fruitful, and that could push you to make some changes as well. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care, and all the best for the next 3 months on this Cardinal Quadrant event.